What happens when one of Britain's most beloved actors walks into what should be a friendly morning chat show, only to find himself facing a host who seems more interested in stirring up controversy than conducting a proper interview? In just 37 seconds, a single dismissive comment about working-class roots would expose the entitled attitude lurking beneath Lorraine Kelly's cheerful television persona, leading to one of the most shocking walkouts in daytime TV history. The morning started like any other at the ITV studios. Caine, the legendary actor known for his distinctive Cockney accent and working-class pride, had agreed to appear on Lorraine Kelly's morning show to discuss his latest film project. At 89 years old, Caine had seen it all in his decades-long career, from his early days struggling in London's East End to becoming one of cinema's most recognizable voices. He settled into the bright studio chair, expecting the usual lighthearted banter that morning television was known for. Lorraine Kelly, sitting across from him with her trademark smile, seemed pleasant enough at first. The cameras rolled, and she launched into her introduction with the practiced enthusiasm that had made her a household name. "Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the show. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by the wonderful Caine, who needs no introduction, really." She turned to face him directly, her smile never wavering. "Now, Michael, you've had such an incredible career spanning over 60 years. Tell me, what keeps you motivated at this stage of your life?" Caine leaned forward slightly, his eyes lighting up with the passion that had driven him throughout his career. "Well, Lorraine, it's the same thing that's always motivated me, really. I come from very humble beginnings in South London, and I never forget where I came from. Every role I take, every project I work on, it's about telling stories that matter to ordinary people. That's what keeps me going." Kelly nodded, but there was something in her expression that suggested she wasn't entirely engaged with his answer. Yes, your background is quite well documented, isn't it? The whole rags to riches story. But surely now, with all your success, you must feel quite removed from those early days?" The question caught Caine slightly off guard. There was an edge to her tone that hadn't been there moments before. He straightened in his chair, choosing his words carefully. "I wouldn't say removed, no. If anything, success has made me more appreciative of where I started. When you've known real poverty, real struggle, you don't forget it. It shapes everything about who you are." "Oh, come now, Michael," Kelly interrupted, her smile becoming more strained. "Surely that's a bit theatrical? I mean, you've been living in luxury for decades. Multi-million-pound homes, private jets, mixing with the elite. Don't you think clinging to this working-class image is a bit, well, disingenuous?" The studio seemed to grow quieter. Even the camera operators sensed the shift in atmosphere. Caine's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained controlled. "I'm not clinging to anything, Lorraine. I'm simply being honest about my experiences. Success doesn't erase your past, and it shouldn't. Those experiences, growing up poor, watching my mother struggle to put food on the table, they made me who I am." Kelly leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs in a gesture that somehow managed to look both casual and dismissive at the same time. "But don't you think your audience might find it a bit tiresome? This constant reference to your humble beginnings? I mean, how long can you really play that card?" The words hung in the air like a challenge. Caine's expression changed subtly, the warmth in his eyes cooling to something harder. "Play that card?" he repeated slowly, his famous voice taking on a dangerous quiet. "Is that what you think I'm doing? Well, let's be honest," Kelly continued, seemingly oblivious to the storm she was brewing. "Every interview you do, every appearance, it's always the same story. Poor boy from London makes good. Don't you think it's time to move beyond that narrative? Your fans might appreciate a bit more authenticity." The irony of her words seemed lost on her entirely. Here she was, questioning his authenticity while displaying a complete lack of understanding about what authenticity actually meant. Caine sat perfectly still for a moment, processing not just her words, but the casual cruelty behind them. "Authenticity," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of nearly 9 decades of life experience. "You want to talk about authenticity? Let me tell you about authenticity, Lorraine. Authenticity is remembering the woman who raised you when everyone else had given up. Authenticity is never forgetting the people who believed in you when you had nothing. Authenticity is staying true to your values even when you're sitting in a television studio being told that your life story is tiresome." Kelly's smile faltered for just a moment, but she pressed on with the determination of someone who had never truly faced real hardship. "Oh, I'm not saying your story isn't inspiring, Michael. I'm just suggesting that perhaps your audience would enjoy hearing about your current lifestyle, your recent successes, rather than dwelling on the past. After all, that was a very long time ago." A very long time ago, Caine repeated, his voice dropping to that unmistakable gravelly tone that had commanded attention in countless films. The words seemed to echo in the studio, and for the first time since the interview began, Kelly appeared to realize she might have crossed a line, but instead of backing down, she doubled down with the kind of oblivious privilege that comes from never having to fight for anything. "Well, yes," she said, adjusting her position in her chair with an air of superiority that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. "I mean, you're a successful actor now. You've been knighted, you've won Oscars, you have homes around the world. Surely those early struggles are just ancient history at this point?" Caine's hands, which had been resting calmly on the arms of his chair, slowly curled into fists, not in anger, but in the kind of controlled tension that comes from a lifetime of having to prove yourself to people who never had to prove anything to anyone. "Ancient history?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying more weight than if he had shouted. "Is that what you call the experiences that shaped a human being?" "Now don't get defensive," Kelly said with a patronizing laugh that seemed to slice through the air like a blade. "I'm simply trying to give you an opportunity to talk about your current projects, your current life. Our viewers are more interested in the glamorous Michael Caine of today than dwelling on old sob stories from decades past." The phrase "sob stories" landed like a physical blow. Several crew members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Even the most junior production assistant could sense that something had gone terribly wrong, but Kelly seemed completely unaware of the gravity of her words. She sat there with her perfectly styled hair and her designer outfit, a woman who had built her career on the foundation of other people's stories, dismissing the very experiences that had given one of Britain's greatest actors his depth and humanity. Caine was quiet for a long moment, his piercing blue eyes studying Kelly's face as if seeing her clearly for the first time. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had earned every word he was about to say. "Sob stories," he said slowly. "You think the story of a woman working 3 jobs to keep her children fed is a sob story. You think the story of a young man who left school at 15 to help support his family is a sob story." "Michael, please don't twist my words," Kelly interjected, but there was a nervous edge creeping into her voice now. She had spent years interviewing celebrities who were desperate for publicity, who would smile and laugh and agree with whatever she said just to promote their latest project. She had never encountered someone who refused to play along with their brand of superficial entertainment. "I'm not twisting anything," Caine replied, his composure never wavering. "I'm simply repeating what you said. You called the experiences that made me who I am sob stories. You suggested that my connection to my past is disingenuous. You implied that authenticity means forgetting where you come from." Kelly shifted uncomfortably in her seat, finally beginning to realize that she had seriously misjudged her guest. But rather than apologizing or backing down, she made the fatal error of trying to regain control of the situation through more condescension. "Look, I think you're being a bit oversensitive here. This is morning television, Michael. We're supposed to be having a light, fun conversation. You're making this far too serious." "Oversensitive," Caine repeated, and there was something dangerous in the way he said it. "Let me ask you something, Lorraine. Have you ever gone to bed hungry? Have you ever watched your mother cry because she couldn't afford to buy her children proper shoes? Have you ever been looked down upon by people who assumed you were worthless because of the way you spoke or where you came from?" Kelly's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She had no answer because she had never experienced any of those things. She had grown up in a middle-class family, gone to good schools, and fallen into television work without ever having to fight for anything. The idea that someone might maintain a connection to their struggles, not out of self-pity but out of gratitude and respect, was completely foreign to her. Well, that's not really the point," she stammered, her confidence finally beginning to crack. "The point is that you've overcome all of that. You're successful now. Why dwell on the negative?" Caine leaned forward, his eyes never leaving her face. "Because it's not negative, Lorraine. Those experiences taught me empathy. They taught me humility. They taught me to value hard work and genuine human connection. They taught me that success means nothing if you forget the people who helped you achieve it. But I suppose someone who's never had to struggle for anything wouldn't understand that." The words hit their mark with surgical precision. Kelly's face flushed red, and for the first time in the interview, her mask of professional composure slipped completely. "Now that's completely uncalled for," she snapped, her voice rising in pitch. "You don't know anything about my life or what I've been through." "You're absolutely right," Caine said, his voice returning to its normal volume but losing none of its intensity. "I don't know anything about your life, but I know what you've shown me in the last few minutes. I know that you think poverty is a sob story. I know that you think authenticity is something to be questioned. I know that you think success should make a person ashamed of where they came from. Kelly tried to interrupt, but Caine held up a hand and continued speaking with the kind of quiet authority that commanded attention. And most importantly, I know that you think you can sit there in your comfortable chair and dismiss the experiences that shaped not just me, but millions of working-class people who have fought their entire lives for a fraction of what you take for granted. The studio had fallen completely silent, except for the low hum of the cameras. Even the director seemed frozen, unsure whether to cut away or let the confrontation continue. Kelly looked around desperately, as if hoping someone would come to her rescue, but she was entirely on her own. She had created this situation through her own arrogance and dismissiveness, and now she had to face the consequences. I think we should move on to talking about your new film, Kelly said desperately, her voice taking on a pleading quality that was a far cry from her earlier condescension. She shuffled through her notes with trembling hands, trying to find some way to salvage what had become a complete disaster. But Caine wasn't finished. The floodgates had opened, and decades of dealing with people who looked down on his background had reached a breaking point. No, he said simply, the single word carrying more weight than an entire speech. We're not moving on, because this is exactly the problem, isn't it? When someone challenges your comfortable worldview, you want to just brush it aside and change the subject. But that's not how real conversations work, Lorraine. That's not how real life works. Kelly's professional mask had completely cracked now, revealing the entitled person beneath. Michael, I really think you're blowing this out of proportion, she said, her voice rising with a mixture of frustration and panic. I was simply trying to conduct an interview about your current projects. You're the one who's turned this into some sort of lecture about class warfare. The phrase class warfare seemed to hang in the air like an accusation. Caine stared at her for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was filled with a quiet disappointment that was somehow more devastating than anger would have been. Class warfare, he repeated slowly. Is that what you call it when someone refuses to be ashamed of where they came from? Is that what you call it when someone suggests that working class experiences have value? That's not what I said, Kelly protested, but her voice lacked conviction. She knew exactly what she had said, and more importantly, she knew exactly what she had meant. Her dismissive attitude toward his background hadn't been a misunderstanding or a poorly chosen phrase. It had been a genuine reflection of how she viewed people who didn't share her privileged background. Caine slowly pushed his chair back from the small table that separated them. The gesture was subtle, but everyone in the studio understood its significance. You know what the real tragedy is here, Lorraine? It's not that you don't understand where I came from. It's that you don't want to understand. You've built your entire career on talking to people, on supposedly connecting with your audience, but you have no interest in actually listening to what anyone has to say. Now, that's simply not true, Kelly said, but her protest sounded weak even to her own ears. I listen to all my guests. I've interviewed thousands of people over the years. Have you? Caine asked, tilting his head slightly. Or have you just waited for them to finish talking so you could ask your next pre-written question? Because there's a difference, you know. There's a difference between hearing words and actually listening to what someone is telling you about their life, their experiences, their values. Kelly opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She had been exposed completely, not by some elaborate trap or gotcha journalism, but simply by her own behavior. Every dismissive comment, every condescending tone, every attempt to minimize his experiences had revealed exactly who she was underneath her television persona. I've spent my entire career trying to tell stories that matter, Caine continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. Stories about real people facing real challenges. Stories about the dignity of ordinary working people. Stories about the importance of remembering where you come from and never losing sight of what really matters in life. And you sit there and call those stories tiresome sob stories from ancient history. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of Kelly's humiliation. She looked around the studio as if searching for an escape route, but there was nowhere to run. She had created this situation through her own arrogance, and now she had to face the consequences in front of her entire audience. Perhaps we could take a short break, she suggested weakly. But Caine was already standing up. The movement was deliberate and dignified, the action of a man who had decided he would not subject himself to one more second of disrespect. There's no need for a break, he said, reaching up to remove the small microphone that had been clipped to his jacket. I think I've said everything that needs to be said. He placed the microphone carefully on the table, the small gesture somehow carrying enormous weight. Kelly watched in horror as her interview, her show, her carefully constructed professional image crumbled before her eyes. "Michael, please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's just finish the interview. We can talk about your film, your upcoming projects. Please don't leave like this." Caine paused at the edge of the interview area and turned back to face her one final time. His expression wasn't angry anymore. If anything, it was sad. "You still don't understand, do you?" he said quietly. "This was never about the interview. This was never about my film or my projects. This was about basic human respect. This was about treating people's experiences, their struggles, their triumphs, with the dignity they deserve." He took a step closer, his voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. "I've worked with some of the greatest directors, actors, and artists of the past 60 years. I've met presidents and prime ministers, kings and queens. And you know what I've learned? The most interesting, the most valuable, the most authentic people are often the ones who remember their struggles, who honor their past, who never forget where they came from. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? Because you've never had to fight for anything in your entire life." The words hit Kelly like physical blows. She sat there in her expensive chair, surrounded by all the trappings of television success, exposed as someone who had built her career on the foundation of other people's stories, while having no appreciation for the depth and meaning of those stories. Caine straightened his jacket with quiet dignity and walked toward the studio exit. His steps echoed in the silence that had fallen over the entire production. No one moved. No one spoke. Everyone simply watched as one of Britain's most beloved actors chose his self-respect over a television appearance, chose authenticity over politeness, chose dignity over accommodation. As he reached the studio door, he paused one final time without turning around. "Good luck with the rest of your show, Lorraine," he said, his voice carrying just the faintest trace of pity. "I hope someday you learn the difference between entertainment and exploitation." And with that, Michael Caine walked out of the studio, leaving behind a host who finally understood that she had just lost a battle she never should have started. The cameras kept rolling, capturing Kelly's stunned expression as she sat alone in her interview area, surrounded by the wreckage of her own making. In 37 seconds, a single dismissive comment about working-class roots had revealed everything anyone needed to know about the difference between earned respect and borrowed authority.